The three questions. It once occurred to a certain king that he would never fail in anything if he always knew the answers to three questions. How can I know the right time for every action? Who are the people most important to me, and to whom I ought to give the greatest attention? And above all, what is the most important thing to do? The king proclaimed that he would bestow a large reward on anyone who could answer his three questions. Learned men began coming to the king, but they all gave different answers. In reply to the first question, some said that to know the right time for every action, the king must draw up a schedule of days, months, and years, and strictly stick to it. Only in this way, they said, could he do everything at the proper time. Others said it was impossible for one man to decide the proper time for every action. They urged the king to have a council of wise men and act according to their advice. Another group said that certain matters required immediate decision. For such matters, the king could not wait to ask wise men whether it was the right time to take action. The only way you can know if it is the right time to act, they said, is to know in advance what is going to happen. Only a magician can know this. Therefore, in order to know the right time for every action, you must consult the magicians. The king also received many different answers to his second question. Who are the people most important to me, and to whom I ought to give the greatest attention? Some said that the people most important to the king were his administrators. Some said the priests, some said the physicians, others said the warriors. To his third question, what is the most important thing to do, the king received equally diverse answers. Some said that science was the most important pursuit in the world. Some said military skill, others said religious worship. The answers were all different, therefore the king agreed with none of them and rewarded no one. In order to find the true answers to his questions, he decided to consult a hermit who was famous for his wisdom. The hermit never left the forest where he lived, and there he would speak only with plain folk. So the king dressed himself as one of the people. Well, before he reached the hermit's dwelling, he dismounted. He left his knights behind and went on alone. The king found the hermit digging a garden in front of his hut. When he saw the king, the hermit greeted him and returned to his digging. He was thin and frail, and each time he thrust his spade into the ground and turned a little clod of earth, he breathed heavily. The king said, I have come to see you, wise hermit, to ask you for the answers to three questions. How can I know the right time for every action, so that I do not allow some important act to slip by only to regret it later? Who are the most important to me, and to whom I ought to give the most attention? And what is the most important thing to do, which therefore I ought to do first? The hermit listened to the king, but gave him no answer. He merely spat on his hands and started digging again. You have exhausted yourself, said the king. Give me the spade. I'll work for a while. Thanks, said the hermit. He handed him the spade and sat down on the ground. After digging 2 beds, the king stopped and repeated his questions. The hermit did not answer, but got up and held out his hand for the spade, saying, Now you rest and I'll work. But the king did not give him the spade. He went on digging. An hour passed, then another. The sun had begun to sink behind the trees when the king stuck the spade into the ground and said, I came to you, wise man, for answers to my questions. If you can give me none, tell me so, that I shall return home. Here comes someone running, said the hermit. Let us see who it is. The king looked around and saw a bearded man running out of the woods. The man held his hands pressed to his stomach. His fingers were covered with blood. He ran up to the king and fell fainting to the ground, where he lay still, weakly moaning. The king and the hermit opened the man's clothing. There was a large wound in his stomach. The king washed it as well as he could and bandaged it with his own handkerchief and the hermit's towel. When the blood at last ceased flowing, the wounded man revived and asked for water. The king brought fresh water and gave him a drink. Meanwhile, the sun had set and it grew cool. The king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut and laid him on the bed. He closed his eyes and grew still. The king was so tired from the work he had done that he lay down and fell asleep. He slept soundly through the short summer night. When he woke, it was some time before he realized where he was and recalled the bearded stranger lying on the bed, who was now staring at him with shining eyes. Forgive me, said the bearded man in a faint voice, when he saw that the king was awake and looking at him. I do not know you, and I have nothing to forgive you, replied the king. You do not know me, but I know you. I am your enemy, and I swore to take vengeance on you for the death of my brother and the loss of my property. I knew you had come alone to see the hermit, and I resolved to kill you on your way back. But when the whole day passed and you did not return, I left to seek you out and came upon your knights instead. They recognized me, attacked me, and wounded me. I escaped from them, but I would have bled to death if you had not cared for my wound. I intended to kill you, and you have saved my life. Now, if I live, and if you wish it, I will serve you faithfully. Forgive me. The king was happy to be reconciled with his enemy. He not only forgave him, but also promised to return his property and send his own physician and servants to attend to him. The king left the wounded man and went out to look for the hermit. He wished for the last time to ask him to answer his questions. The hermit was on his knees in the yard, sowing seeds in the beds that had been dug the day before. The king approached him and said, "For the last time, wise man, I ask you to answer my questions." "But you have already been answered," said the hermit, squatting on his thin calves and looking up to the king who stood before him. "How have I been answered?" asked the king. "How?" repeated the hermit. "Had you not taken pity on my weakness yesterday and dug those beds for me, instead of turning back alone, that fellow would have assaulted you, and you would have regretted not staying with me. Therefore, the most important time was when you were digging the beds. I was the most important man, and the most important pursuit was to do good to me. And later, when the man came running to us, the most important time was when you were taking care of him. For if you had not bound up his wound, he would have died without having made peace with you. Therefore, he was the most important man, and what you did for him was the most important deed. Remember then, there is only one important time, now. It is important because it is the only time when we are masters of ourselves, and the most important man is he whom you are. For no one can know whether or not he will ever have dealings with any other man. And the most important thing to do is to do good to him, since it is for that purpose alone that this man was sent into this life. The end.